Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We have come to the end of our journey through Exodus. Tonight is our last parsha in Exodus. And so it's a good time to consider where we are and what we have learned in the process. We began Exodus about 300 years after Genesis ended. The people are no longer the honored guests of a grateful nation. They still live in the land of Goshen for the most part, but now they're slaves, property to be sold and bought, having less rights than the horses and cattle the Egyptians are so proud of. A lot can happen in 300 years, and apparently it has. And like oppressed people everywhere, the people prayed. God heard their prayers and sent a baby. And while this baby is still tiny, he is found and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, who graciously paid the baby's mother to raise him. Now, what did mom think when she handed over her child to Pharaoh's daughter? Did she think, all I can do now is pray? Or did she think, I have the ear of the creator of the universe. I can pray. Most likely, both those thoughts struggled in her head and her heart. But yes, she prayed. I can assure you that. After 40 years in Pharaoh's house, this young man still had an affinity for his people. And after an abortive attempt to rescue them, had to flee around the Suez finger of the Red Sea into the Sinai Peninsula and lived there as a shepherd for another 40 years. Then, after discussion with a burning bush, he returned to Egypt to announce to his people that God had heard their prayers and would deliver them from slavery in Egypt. The people didn't believe him. Of course not. So he went to Pharaoh and to tell Pharaoh about God's plans. And Pharaoh said, no. This leads to a deep duel between the God of the Egyptians, Pharaoh, and the God of Israel. The God of Israel demands the people are set free to worship God in the wilderness and threatens to send specific plagues if this does not happen. Pharaoh says, no. The God of Israel sends the promised plague, but not in the land of Goshen where the majority of the Israelites live. We have no idea how long this duel lasted. Some commentators say as short as 5 weeks. Others say as long as a year. I'm leaning towards the longer number. This duel is quickly noticed by the people of Egypt, who run to take the threats of Israel's God seriously. Certainly, this favoritism was also noticed by the people of Israel, who had to notice that God was fighting for them. This continues until the 10th and final plague, the killing of the firstborn, when Pharaoh finally demands the people leave immediately. The people are ready. Moses leads the people south through the desert to pick up the Israelites who live in southern Egypt, then turns back and travels towards the upper part of the Red Sea. Pharaoh realizes his slaves are escaping, sends his army and chariots to stop them. Moses holds out his staff, the sea parts, the people cross the seabed to the Sinai Peninsula, the army chases them and are drowned in the returning waters. That is our first 15 chapters of Exodus. Yes, I'm going to do a flash through the whole thing. We have some questions here. The people watched the plagues. They could see God's favoritism. As soon as they left Egypt, the presence of God went before them in the form of a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. You couldn't miss it. Yet as soon as they got to the Red Sea, they said, and wanted to go back to Egypt. They watched the miracle of the parting of the sea and saw the army dead on the seashore. Yet 3 days later, they rebelled against Moses because the water they found was bitter. Moses listened to them and Moses listened to them. He prayed and was instructed what to do. But I have to wonder, 3 days after all these miracles, and they're going, need to go back to Egypt. Then 2.5 months out of Egypt, they again start complaining about lack of food and again wanted to return to Egypt. The people have seen the miracles. They have seen the presence of God being for them, going before them. What is the problem? But let's not answer that question just yet. Let's put it in the back of our heads, just right over here. And we're going to continue our running through Exodus. But I want you to think, what's going on? Why do you can see God in front of you. God has taken care of so much. Why can't you trust God for a little bit more? Hold that thought right over here. From the Red Sea crossing, the people traveled south to Mount Horeb, also now known as Mount Sinai. Along the way, God provides water to drink and manna and quails to eat. Each time there's a problem, the people went to Moses and said, we want to go back to Egypt. Each time Moses prayed and God answered. 3 months out of Egypt, chapter 19, they come to the wilderness of Sinai, and Moses climbed the mountain to talk with God. God spoke to Moses and made a covenant with people. Moses shared God's word with the people, and the people said, yes. God spoke directly to the people and gave them the 10 commandments. People responded that Moses should listen to God and tell them what God said. Otherwise, if they listened to God, they might die. Chapter 20. And something in the back of my mind is saying, they don't need to hear God. We don't want to hear God. Are we beginning to see a pattern here? Is the answer to our previous question beginning to materialize? But let's put that beside the previous question and continue. We have another 20 chapters to race through. But, that's stacking up, and that's just really in the back of my mind, going, God's presence was there at the base of the mountain. God's presence was seen in the thick darkness over the mountain. Moses went into that darkness, and God spoke about how the people needed to live together and treat each other with respect, and what the results would be. That's chapter 20 through 23. So apparently he comes down because, again, Moses is invited up the mountain, this time with Aaron and his sons and 70 elders. Moses tells the people what God said. The people agree to do all these things. Moses offers burnt offerings and peace offerings. And apparently there was enough time between the first visit and this visit that Moses was able to write down what God had said, because Moses reads these words now, and the people again affirm that they will be obedient to the covenant. Then Moses and the elders go up to the mountain, and they eat and drink in God's presence. They can see God. They can see, the pavement of incredible jewels that God's throne is on. This is such an incredible event, and it's just got to be the highlight of everyone's life, to see God and eat and drink in God's presence. Then Moses is called further up the mountain to receive a written copy of the commandments from God, written by God. And Moses was gone 40 days, 40 nights, chapter 24. While on the mountain, God told Moses to build a tabernacle so that God could dwell in the midst of God's people, and gave Moses directions on how to do this, chapters 25 through 30. We're going fast. God also told Moses that God had called Bezalel and empowered him to be in charge of the construction, chapter 31. And God gave Moses the 2 stone tables to take with him down the mountain. Now, sometime after the feast with God and before Moses returns from the mountain, Aaron, his sons, and the 70 elders descend from the mountain. The people saw Moses enter the thick darkness like he had done before. But this time, no idea why, they panic and demand Aaron make them gods who will go before them. And Aaron agrees and makes a golden bull calf. Chapter 32. Making a golden calf takes a long time. First, one needs to make a mold. This would typically be made out of clay, sculpted carefully, polished and fired. The two sides pieces have to fit together. It's difficult. Since they're in the desert, just finding the clay is going to be a massive endeavor. Finding the kindling to fire the mold is a huge endeavor. They have to burn this mold so that it's hard and it's not going to leave residue on whatever is inside it. And it has to be able to hold it without crumbling. This is a big deal. This is really a big deal. Somebody has to know what they're doing, making this mold. This is not let's do this today. It isn't. Anyway, then the gold has to be melted to the right temperature and carefully poured into this mold. The mold is turned to ensure that the gold covers all of the surfaces. This is a huge job. You're going to have a lot of people. You're going to have a lot of organization. This is heavy. When it is cooled, the mold is opened and the gold needs to be buffed and polished, and uneven surfaces are smoothed. Or maybe this would be more difficult, or maybe they just fill the mold with gold. You just pour the gold into the whole mold. The mold has to be held shut. This process is even more complex as they have to make sure the gold solidifies evenly. I can't see it done in 40 days. So were they planning this for a long time and put the work into action as soon as they see Moses disappear? Or maybe they brought the molds with them. This is a huge job and requires the concentrated efforts of a huge number of people. I've personally never done gold, but I've done clay. Gold is much more delicate. And so I spent a bunch of time looking at this golden calf thinking, how? You've got the elders and Aaron went up the mountain. They have dinner with God. Moses goes up, they go down. And then, my mind is boggled. And then even more so, where are the 70 elders? They saw God. They ate and drank in God's presence. Did they just throw out that memory? Yeah, I must have been hallucinating. Sunstroke, Did they do anything to try and stop this madness? And then there's Aaron and his two sons, who also ate and drank in God's presence. Aaron, who'd been involved in so many miracles, agrees to make this calf for them. The people say, make us gods who will go before us. Who's been leading them ever since they left Egypt? Who's been taking care of them? Who sent the plagues and preserved them? The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night had been with them every day since they left Egypt. Did they stop noticing? God spoke to them, and they say they didn't want to hear God again. God made a covenant with them and gave them the commandments. And they replied, what God has said, we will obey. How many days ago was that? So let's take a brief break in the narrative and talk about this. I'm exploding about it. In fact, as I was writing this, I spent a lot of time walking up and down because I was going, how can this be? So Talk to me. What are you seeing?
I got an opinion.
Please.
Okay, this happened later, when the Bible was put together, but God warned the people that they were not to mingle with the foreigners, right?
Yeah.
They actually brought people out of Egypt with them. They were Egyptians.
Yep.
And so I'm sure partly where the contamination started.
So you're thinking partially that, except that God goes on at length saying that the sojourners to be treated like the people that were part of there, like the rest of the nation.
And they had to do specific things to be considered part of the people.
I was wondering if this case was anything like when Pilate had brought Jesus out and he said, "What shall we do with this guy?" And somebody or somebodies started shouting, "Crucify him," and kind of incited the mob. I think the 70 elders were still there, but I think there must have been some sort of at least an argument, if not a fight's going on about it. I can see where they would have been able to make that calf in 40 days because, like you said, you don't know what the Egyptians brought with them, and you don't know. And the interesting thing is just from my own experience, is that you could see God working, the Red Sea parted and everything, but you don't know when God is going to stop working for you because you're not that familiar with him and you don't know for how long he's going to do it. So I think that was their issue. And that happened to me a lot in my life where I would trust in somebody and then the person would fail me, either just not show up anymore or something. And so it's difficult to know. I don't know. I still have problems with my faith because of it. I have to keep praying and praying all the time. So I think that it's possible they could have found clay. It's possible they could have had a mold. I mean, we don't know. I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm just saying there are so many possibilities.
Well, the other thing that has to be considered, God gave these rules, but they didn't have any of these rules for almost 400 years because what was taught to them while they were in Egypt, right? They had lived as Egyptians. They had worked for Egyptians. They were slaves. Yes, they lived in Goshen, which was mostly a farming rural community. They supplied the food, but who said some of them weren't trained in other things? Obviously, we knew they knew how to make bricks. So maybe they knew some of them knew how to make idols.
What I'm thinking is the people are not comfortable with a living God who makes covenants. They are not comfortable with a God who speaks to them and expects an answer. They are not comfortable with a God who expects certain behaviors. They are used to a silent God who demands nothing, but looks good. A God they can carry around and brag about or ignore as they choose. And quite bluntly, who doesn't want a God they can control? My little lamp. And God will do what I say or do what I want. We see that in the world around us all the time. I prayed about it. God's going to do it. And if God doesn't do it, it's because I haven't prayed hard enough. Because my will is God's will. But we notice that God is not okay with the calf and sends Moses down the mountain to deal with the situation, chapter 32. God is angry and talks about destroying the people. This is definitely not a passive God. Moses persuades God to remember God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel and not destroy the people. Then Moses went down the mountain, sees what God's so upset about, and throws the tablets down, breaks them, and breaks them. Moses must have been really, really strong. I cannot throw a rock and make it break. Then he breaks down and burns the golden calf, grinds it into powder, and throws it in the people's drinking water. Moses asked Aaron what the people had done to him to make him commit this sin, and Moses and Aaron refuses to take responsibility for his actions. Then Moses had the Levites kill 3,000 people for the sins of the nation. Then God sent a plague on the people. I mean, this is chapter 32 and 33. It's a lot. Then God told Moses to take the people to the land God had promised, but God was not going to go with them. When the people heard this, they mourned, and Moses again interceded with God for the people. God agreed to do as Moses said. Then Moses asked to see God's glory, and God allowed Moses to see God's back. Then God tells Moses to carve 2 more stones and bring them up the mountain. God again proclaims who God is, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and mercy. God proclaims the commandments and again writes the commandments on the stone. Again, God talks about dwelling in the midst of the people. Again, Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Interestingly enough, this time nobody does anything bad or stupid, and everything's good. Moses comes down from talking to God, his face shone, and the people were afraid of him, but he called to them and gave them the commandments, and everything is both hunky and dory. Which brings us to today's parsha, chapter 35 to 40. Before the calf incident in chapters 25 to 31, God gave instructions for how the tabernacle was to be built and how it was to be furnished and who was to be in charge. These instructions are repeated. This time the people do as they're told and do so with glad and generous hearts, bringing so much of the needed material that Moses has to tell them to stop. The people constructed the tabernacle just as God had told them. Moses assembled it and consecrated it. When Moses was finished setting up the tabernacle and consecrating it, the pillar of cloud descended on the tabernacle and stayed there. A pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. When the cloud lifted, the people would pack up and follow. When the cloud stayed in the tabernacle, they would stay. And this is where Exodus ends. However, I do want to add one verse from Numbers 2, chapter 2, verse 2 to our parsha, which just seemed really important to me. The people of Israel shall camp facing the tent on every side. Now, this is the 2nd year after they left Egypt. Can you imagine the difference in the people when the first thing they saw in the morning when they opened their tent was the tabernacle and the presence of God above it? And I'm wondering if part of the growing process, this is my thoughts. And I was thinking, did they get used to having the pillar of cloud and fire ahead of them? And so they were busy talk, and we're not focused on that because everyone's going that direction. I don't need to look that way. And then Moses is up there on the mountain with the cloud of the dark cloud. And, I don't have to look up at the top of the mountain every 15 minutes. And I can just sort of get used to it after 40 days and ignore it. However, it just struck me as if I have to open up my tent and look at God's presence every morning, there's something else going on here in my heart. And as usual, I have to ask, what does all of this mean to us? The thing that jumps out for me as I read Exodus And even more as we did this fast review through Exodus, is that God is real and God wants to be in a relationship with each of us. And so, how do we build that relationship with God? And then I thought, well, let's rephrase that. How do we build a relationship with anyone? Throw things out.
Spending time with them. That's the first thing. You can't
We
develop a
spend time
relationship
with them.
if you don't spend time with them. Yeah.
Talking,
Excellent.
talking,
listen.
probably, when you first meet somebody, the thing you do is you talk, learn all about them each side.
Yeah. We spend time with them. We listen to them. We learn about them, and we share ourselves. We listen to them. We share ourselves. As we were getting to know them a little bit better, we look for ways to make them happy in real and tangible ways. In my relationship with Joseph, he likes rocks. I didn't know I was a rock collector, but I married him 40 some years ago. I collect rocks. Oh, that is a cool rock. It's this little one with sort of green and dark greens. Joseph would like this. So I have to, I've always got rocks in my pocket because he likes rocks. And so now I like rocks too. They make us happy because it makes him happy. So it makes me happy. And we're happy because there's all these little rocks. We do things for them. We give them gifts. We do things to make them happy. So we said, we spend time with people, we listen to them, we share ourselves with them, we look for ways to make them happy in real and tangible ways, we give them gifts.
Following his commandments, giving tithe and offerings, trying to tell other people about him. These are all tangible ways that God knows we're paying attention. We're having this Psalms.
Yes, let's back up on that one. When we're talking, when we are in love, we talk about the person we're in love with all the time. Of course, we're going to talk about God if we're in love with God.
Right.
We're just going to, because we're in love. And when we're in love, there's only one thing on our mind.
So true. So true.
Yeah. And so the second time they're told about the tabernacle, they are so excited they can't give enough and they have to be told to stop giving. I'm not sure how they changed from the first time Moses was gone for 4 days to the second time, but there is such a big difference.
Right.
In the second time, they are loving God. And they want to do things that make God happy because that makes them happy. And they want to listen. And they want to talk to God. And they want to face their camp towards the tent of meeting so they can look at God. And they didn't want to before that. It has just astonished me as I was going through doing a rapid read through that, how things changed. And maybe you did as I was doing a rapid talk through it. Like Eli was saying, at first, they don't trust God. My last set of questions is, how does our relationship with God change when God is the center of our lives? When we open up our tent every morning looking at God? When our God is our first thought when we wake up, when we speak and know God is listening, when we listen and we are waiting for God to speak to us? How does our relationship with God change then?
Because we look towards God on a daily basis as we do prayer and communicate with him throughout the day. It's kind of like goes, I was reading Psalm 24 and it talks about the earth is Lord and all the holes. And if I was to phrase that, I'd say the whole world is full of God, which makes the business of a religion is to keep that awesome truth ever before us, right? That God is everywhere in the world and we need to keep that thought in our mind that God is, it's an awesome truth that he's there for us if we need him. And if we don't need him, he's still there for us, you know? As they say, people say, well, God, where were you when I called out to you? And all they got to do is turn around. He's standing right there, you know? He hasn't gone anywhere. We've gone away from him.
Or we just said, nah, I don't feel like listening anymore. Stop talking. And I don't feel like talking to you either. And yeah, sometimes we get really ticked off with God and say, I don't feel like listening to you. But God is still willing to speak to us and communicate with us. I love how the people grow from the beginning of Exodus to the end of Exodus. I love how their walk with God grows. I can't always figure out how they got from A to B or from C to D, but you can really see their growth. And I love it. And it tells us that we don't know everything, today. We don't know everything tomorrow, but we're growing. And that's good. Let's close with prayer. Gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and mercy, always more willing to speak than we are to listen, always more eager to listen than we are to speak. Fill our hearts and minds with you. Open our ears to hear you. Open our eyes to see you. Show us how to be your friend, just as Moses was. We want to love you more. We want to walk with you every day of our lives. We give you our present and our future, and we ask that you be present in all of it. Amen.